What is up? Welcome in to No Pun Intended, presented by Club Fantasy. It's me again, Ryan Weiss hosting. No Joe Zolo yet again this week. But before you go to the comments to complain, this also isn't a live show, but for good reason. If we can land the right guest, as much as we love chatting with you guys, we operate on their schedule. And my goodness, did we land the right guest? I want you to imagine being Joe Zolo right now, trying to build a young career in the sports industry, and then having to pass up the opportunity to talk fantasy football for 1 hour with Stephania Bell. That's right. We have ESPN's Stephania Bell here with us. We are talking the Buffalo Bills, the Tennessee Titans, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. 3 good teams, 1 amazing guest. It is going to be a great show. Stick with us. Welcome into No Pun Intended. I am your host, Ryan Weiss. Still no Joe Zolo this week, and it doesn't even matter because we have the greatest possible guest we could have. But before we get to that, we are going to introduce my co-host, the founder of Club Fantasy. He's with me every week, a lover of Deontay Johnson and a hater of Cole Kmet, Josh Hudson. How's it going,
that was
buddy?
good. I like that. I'm basking in this moment. This is surreal for me. So, Stephania freaking Bell. Holy crap.
I was going to say.
Yeah. I mean, the very first podcast I started listening to when I really got into fantasy was the 06010 with ESPN. So been a Stephania fan for over a decade now. And this is like a check off the bucket list for me. So Stephania, thank you for agreeing to join us. And a huge shout out to Faith, because without getting you on the Women of Fantasy show last year, I don't know that this happens this year. So shout out to Faith and thank you, Stephania. How the hell are you this morning?
I'm great. Faith is wonderful. I appreciate you guys inviting me on. I mean, my takeaway from what you just said there is that I'm old.
Oh, stop.
It's true though. I mean, it's look, when I'm reminded of how long we've been doing what we've been doing on the 06010, I'm always really grateful, because without people who listened and tuned in like you guys, we wouldn't get to do what we did. And it's really been remarkable to see the growth in the fantasy industry since I started at ESPN. When I remember people saying, you're leaving, clinical sports medicine to do what? And people are like, I remember hearing people say, well, they just, number one, they didn't believe it would grow. And then it was clearly growing over the first few years. And everyone's response was, well, it's going to max out. Basically, like it's going to flame out. And I was like, you're not seeing the numbers I'm seeing. And
you
what
just
I'm seeing about
what's
happening in the industry.
Nerds, and I'm one of them.
Well, and different voices too, which I think is great. There's a lot of different perspectives. And I think now with technology being what it is, there's a lot of avenues to get into the industry. And so I'm really happy to see, you guys and other folks who have basically broken in and are providing a distinct voice for people who are looking for, something that fits with what their interests are. So I appreciate you inviting me.
Oh, we appreciate having you. And as a sincere thank you, I'm probably not the right person to thank you, but as a podcast that very much focuses on the women of fantasy football, you are an icon to everybody we've ever spoken with. And so just if you take nothing else away from this show, just know that we appreciate you. Josh stepped on my intro, but I was going to call you your favorite expert's favorite expert, because that's truly what you are in this industry. And so before we even get into the teams, just a wholehearted thank you for even joining us this week, but more importantly for the work that you put in every week. So we really do appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thank you guys.
All right. As I mentioned, we are covering the Buffalo Bills, Tennessee Titans, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And with Stephania's expertise in injury, I cannot wait to get to the Tennessee Titans. So we're just going to blow through the Buffalo Bills because who cares about them? But I'm obviously completely
cue to the Buffalo fans who have something to say about that.
Yeah, I was going to say they're a really calm bunch, so I'm not.
Yeah,
worried
luckily
about,
you probably won't
them.
hear much from them.
Exactly. So as you know, we're going to cover 3 teams on the show. We kind of break down the offensive changes if there were any. The Bills went 11-6 last year. year. They brought back Sean McDermott. However, there was a change at offensive coordinator because Brian Daboll jumped ship to the Giants. Ken Dorsey is going to take over as offensive coordinator, but he was there last year. You can probably expect a very
Ken
similar
Dorsey
offense. From the University of
Miami. See, damn it, I should have worn my Miami gear.
I know. I should have too.
Well, I would just like to point out that I'm an Ohio State fan, and my memories of Ken Dorsey are probably way worse than better than your guys' memories of Ken Dorsey. So shout out to Maurice Claret. Anyway, Josh and I will give our players with the most upside and the players we think are traps, but the show is really going to focus on Stephania's answers to 3 great questions per team. So for upside, Josh has James Cook. I have Jameson Crowder. For the biggest trap, we both have Gabriel Davis, and I'm sure we're going to talk about him a little bit. But to start the show, Stephania, if there is one Buffalo Bill that you have to leave your draft with, who is it going to be?
I mean, it's Josh Allen.
I have a debate with that, which sounds hilarious talking to you, but I want you to go first. So.
Well, look, the thing is, the reason these questions are hard, you guys ask good questions, but they're hard because my strategy might be different in different leagues. And that's always what it comes down to. So when we draft, over in our ESPN leagues and we do these mock drafts with each other, we all wait on quarterbacks, right? Because we tend to think there's value at the quarterback position. There's so many people who can get you so many points. And if you're playing in a standard 10-team league, even a 12-team league, you're going to have depth at quarterback. You're not going to race necessarily. I'm not going to be the person who probably drafts Josh Allen in one of my other leagues because I won't invest that early. However, I'm playing in the Scott Fish Bowl where there's different metrics for quarterbacks and there's, first down points, there's completion, accuracy matters. There's ways that quarterbacks stack up points that are different. I had the first pick and I took Josh Allen. Okay. So no matter how you slice it, thank you. That was a really tough pick for me, but no matter how you slice it, there are going to be fantasy rewards from Josh Allen. It just depends where you want to invest. And so every time I answer this, I'm going for who's most obviously the most productive, but strategy wise, I would be perfectly happy. Somebody's going to go too early on Josh Allen. I'd still like Stefon Diggs, because I think he's going to be, again, probably the most consistently fantasy relevant non-quarterback position and probably will go about where I would want to draft him.
Well, you have destroyed every counterpoint I made because I was going to complain about the ADP. One person who I know is absolutely cheesing when they hear this, our writer, Chris Molina, just wrote an entire article about why reaching for Josh Allen is actually not that bad of an idea this year because he is expecting a Lamar Jackson-esque MVP type season out of Josh Allen. So obviously I can't argue with that because my argument was going to be Diggs because of the high ADP on Allen. And so get my piece of Josh Allen by getting Stefon Diggs. Josh, do you have anything you want to talk about with Allen or Diggs?
I mean, when I went through and did my stat projections, I have Josh Allen at 41 points above the QB2. Like, I think he's set up for an absolutely fantastic season. And I'm very tempted in some of my home leagues just to have some fun and take Josh Allen early and see how it plays out.
Well,
I mean, why the hell not, right?
So as someone to see how it plays out, we do a mock draft show every Monday, and I see Josh Allen go in the third, sometimes as late as the fifth, but usually the third, sometimes the second. But my issue is when you get to the end of the draft and I see Dak Prescott and Tom Brady going in double-digit rounds, I just would rather have those guys and get even Stefon Diggs in the first round. That's my argument. And Stephania, you hit it on the head. When we're in these industry drafts, everybody goes quarterback late. So the fifth and sixth round to get Josh Allen's a steal every single time. I just couldn't see paying a second round pick for a quarterback. And that's not quite what he's costing this year, but I feel like it's getting to that point.
Right. And that's why, I mean, I first pick overall in Scott Fish Bowl, I take Josh Allen.
Which is super flex for those who are not in Scott Fish Bowl.
So I don't know that I'm doing that anywhere else. Right. Super flex league where you have two quarterbacks. Again, he's going to go in the first, but it's interesting. That's why I like playing in leagues with friends and industry leagues and different types of scoring leagues because strategy does shake out differently.
All right, before we move on, I have to ask, because you mentioned different types of scoring. Everybody on this show but me hates non-PPR. I think standard leagues are still fun and they add a different twist, but Josh and Joe typically go at me. What are your thoughts on standard scoring, non-PPR scoring?
I just have come to like PPR. I mean, look, I love watching the points rack up on Sunday.
Okay.
Yes!
It's as simple as that, right? I just like more points. It's more... I like more points. I don't even have a sophisticated
Come to the dark
argument.
side, Ryan. This is where the smart people live.
I'm not saying I hate PPR. I just also enjoy standards.
I don't hate standard, and I was just doing an article for us on non-PPR. Like I think it's good to remember like from whence we came. Absolutely. I mean, there was no PPR when I started playing fantasy.
When you score 50 points, you win. Wait,
yeah,
what?
But it is fun to just watch the points. I mean,
I think Stephania just called me old.
No.
Well, if you like points, that brings us on to our next thing. Who are you avoiding on the Buffalo Bills?
Well, you guys referenced a little bit in the trap player with Gabriel Davis, and I just think it's because of the hype. It's sort of the push to take him where you got to take him, right? I'm actually kind of interested in Jameson Crowder moving into the slot position, but I think Jameson Crowder is a puzzle, right? Because he hasn't performed up to I think what the expectations were when he was drafted. But if you go back to his Washington days, there were some issues there and some injury issues for him. And I think sometimes when guys start off they have a rough start, it's not an obvious thing. Like somebody tears their ACL and they get granted like, okay, that was a big deal injury. And they sort of get granted like the acknowledgement if that was an injury you were dealing with. Fine. If you have something that's a little more, I don't know what the word is. I'm having trouble word finding this morning, but it's just not so clear cut.
Yeah.
And you struggle. And maybe part of the struggle is being new. Maybe part of the struggle is the injury concerns. Maybe part of the struggle is the fit with the team. And then you get labeled early on. And it's really hard to overcome that. And I think he's more talented than what we've fully seen. And now he's got a really good opportunity in a high-powered offense with a way better quarterback than he's had. And so to me, I think I would rather go for a Jameson Crowder than a Gabriel Davis.
Yeah, and one of my favorite points, I agree completely. And when you look at their ADPs, I think that's what, and I think Josh agrees with me here, that's what's making Davis the trap versus Crowder. Davis is going off the board as the wide receiver 31 right now, whereas Crowder you can get as the 68. And when I say 68, he's basically free. Most drafts, he's not even being taken.
Right.
So Josh, I know you kind of agree with Davis being the trap, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like it's just one of those things where we haven't seen Davis do anything outside of score touchdowns in bunches.
In playoffs.
Hasn't topped more than 63 targets in a year. Well, yeah, and I mean, everybody's like, oh my God, he scored 4 touchdowns in a playoff game. This is the next big thing. I mean, he's big, but is he really a big thing? Like, it's just not like he hasn't done it yet. Not saying that he can't do it. And if he's going to do it, this is the type of offense that you want him in because he's got a good quarterback. He has a wide receiver friendly offense, and they're going to throw the football. So can he put it all together? Because he's going to start seeing, that high-low coverage that our co-host Joe likes to talk about, which can take away guys that, get down the field, which is Gabriel Davis's game. Can he run more crisp routes? Like, that's why Cole Beasley saw those types of targets, because he was a good route runner and he had good hands. And that's what bails Josh Allen out when, especially early on in his career, when he wasn't as accurate as he's grown to be. Crowder has that ability. What's going to help Crowder is how soon Josh Allen falls in love with his ability to bail him out. And that's where I think the differentiation is going to be. Like for me, it's Davis or Dawson Knox, because both of those guys are touchdown guys, but both of them aren't, great route runners, and they're not great about beating coverage and separating. And that's where Crowder can grow in that role, again, if he's healthy and on the field. And because that's kind of what we haven't seen him do. He was great that 1 year in New York with the Jets, but that was Adam Gase's scheme. It was target the slot, and that was that.
Yeah.
I I don't know if that's kind of where we're at with Buffalo. Like, I feel like they targeted the slot simply because Cole Beasley was a slot guy. They brought in Emmanuel Sanders last year. Had a couple spike games, but wasn't anything great. And I don't know. There's just a lot. Like, for me, it's Stephon Diggs and Josh Allen are bust in this offense. So I feel like everybody's kind of a trap. But
I was gonna say, I want to point out that he said Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs or bust, not our bust. That came out very, very weird, and we don't want to make that distinction. Josh likes to cater our third question per team to our guest, and with you being an injury expert, this is exactly what he wants to know: is what player on this team is one injury away from being a fantasy surprise this year?
So I wasn't quite sure what you meant by this, because I didn't know if you meant if it's somebody who, if they hadn't had this one injury, they would be more fantasy relevant.
Well, you answer how you want to take it. And
because there's a couple that one is like, everybody's who's potentially a star, they have an injury and it wipes it out. So I figured that wasn't it. But I do think there are people who might be more fantasy relevant if they hadn't had big injury. And one of the, I don't think let's put it this way. I don't know that he's going to be a big star for Buffalo, but I'll be interested to see what he does. That's OJ Howard.
Okay.
Who, came from the Bucs. And with his size and his talent, I think he was destined for really good things. And then he had an awful injury. He tore his Achilles. It's really, a lot of people don't realize how the power that you get, and explosiveness and things that can make you, contested catches, you can win. You can be more physical than another player. Things like that. It's not just about running in a straight line. And I think OJ Howard just, especially in that first year after, he just never really had a chance to elevate. So he could be, in the sense of having had an injury and being undervalued. And then with Dawson Knox,
I was just going to say, if Knox gets hurt, then
there's definite touchdown.
And so I wasn't sure if that's what you meant. If somebody gets hurt and somebody has a chance to step up, he kind of fits both categories. So that's who I
like it.
Well, I think our biggest takeaway here is that Josh should write better questions. But anyway.
No.
Damn.
But moving on from
that's all right. Pick on me. That's fine. Stefania.
No, did I do okay? Did I give you what you were looking for?
I think it's perfect.
You showed up, so you gave us what we're looking for. Just to finish up with the Bills, Joe's biggest sleeper is Jameson Crowder for all the reasons we talked about, but he did add the note that it'll then be Isaiah McKenzie once Crowder gets hurt because he's saying he's injury prone.
Not fair.
That's Joe for you. His IDP stash, Joe covers the IDP for the show, is Gregory Rousseau. He showed promise as a rookie, and he's in a division with a lot of poor offensive lines. And, of course, he's from the U.
The U, baby.
Right. We love it. Hey, look, the U's coming back. I don't know if y'all have been paying attention.
God, I hope so.
I am not a college football guy at all.
We finally got a quarterback.
Yeah. They are spending some cash.
Legally this time. That I do know. All right, we're going to move on to the Titans. Same story with the Titans, 12-5, no replacements. Same coach, Mike Vrabel, same offensive coordinator, Todd Downing. Player with the most fantasy upside. Josh has Treylon Burks. I have Robert Woods. Basically, we just disagree on which receiver is going to pop. Biggest trap. Josh has Derrick Henry. I have Treylon Burks. Stefania, we're going to jump with you. If there's one Tennessee Titan that you are leaving your draft with, I'm guessing it's probably Derrick Henry, but tell us why.
Yeah. I mean, so vanilla, right? Because who else is it going to be? But he's so dominant. He's so dominant.
For you, and I don't mean to keep harping on this, a lot of people are probably afraid of the injury because he is not a spring chicken at running back, and it was a pretty big injury, but we saw him come back kind of early. So what are your thoughts, I guess? Obviously, you want Derrick Henry on your team. Are there injury concerns? Is there something you're watching for this preseason?
I'm not worried at all. So first of all, in the first few years of his career, he wasn't being utilized in the way that running backs typically are. Like, he was a low volume guy for the first couple of, it was like there was this discovery of what Derrick Henry could do. Remember, he was the number 2 for a while. So he doesn't have as much mileage per se on him as people might think, just looking at his years in the league or his actual age. And he's just built so differently. I had a chance to meet him before the Super Bowl in Miami at one of our ESPN events. And I remember standing next to him going, how are you a running back? Like, he's huge. Lovely guy besides, but he's just built so differently that, and we joke about it. You could watch it. I love watching Derrick Henry highlights because you feel like it hurts the person who's trying to tackle him more than it hurts him. Running backs really are a vulnerable position. I will die on the hill that running backs are underpaid relative to their cohorts in the NFL for the amount of for the time that they have to play, their career longevity, what they physically have to go through, their injury risk. They sacrifice themselves more early on than most. And Derrick Henry's just different. I think it's what allows him to be successful at the position. His injury was just an unfortunate injury. Lisfranc injury is obviously something serious. He had a great surgeon. He did a great rehab, and I know how hard he worked to get back. It was really important to him to be there for them if they made it to the playoffs, and that's why he was there. And sure, it was a little bit early. It didn't put him at any risk.
Okay.
The more time you get accustomed, after you've had any kind of big procedure, it takes a while for everything to feel normal again. I think when you see someone come back and they've actually played, you already know that that's out of the way. He's stepped on the field. He's comfortable with the foot. He's put the cleats on. He's been in a game situation. And they went away it wasn't him. It was the game plan fell apart. They were trying to catch up. So he wasn't going to be used that much in that game. But now we know already that he could make it back. And so now it's just a question of seeing him. He's had all these months off now and a chance to get all his conditioning and everything back to normal. So I really don't have any concerns for him.
Josh, where did
it for anybody who's going to come back and say, like, oh, he got hurt in week 2, like, anybody can get hurt anytime.
Thank you.
Football.
I get so tired of hearing it
because
that's my exact response.
I mean, I do not have a crystal ball. If I had, if I did, I would be in Vegas. I would. That's not how injury things work. But we know 2 things. We know that if you are coming off of a recent injury, the best predictor of future injury is past injury. So you look at recency, you look at the type, you look at the number, you look at the, basically the volume, the extent of the injury, and relative to their position. And it's really qualitative. It's not, there's not a precise formula. We haven't figured that out yet, even though there's all sorts of analytics that you can look at, and there are performance metrics that's been done where you can look at data sets, and there's just things that have been published in sports medicine literature looking at positional groups and how they do over time coming back from injury. But there's a lot of there's a lot of latitude taken in looking at that data too, because it's based on these random performance metrics and everyone's clustered together, and it doesn't account for who did the surgery, which can be highly variable, who did the rehab, which that also can be a big influence, and sort of where they were in the seasonal calendar. None of that stuff is accounted for, and we never actually really get to talk about it. So sorry, I just got on my little soapbox about the injury thing there, but all of that goes into my analysis in terms of why I'm either high on someone or not so high.
I was just going to say,
Stephania, anytime you want a soapbox, by all means.
Let's be clear. Nobody else that I'm aware of can tell us how great the surgeon was or how great the rehab was. So please let us know, because even me, who is in on Henry, was worried, and I'm certainly not worried anymore.
Let me tell you something. I'm just going to interrupt you one second. So just to give you an idea, little peek behind the curtain, if you will. So his surgeon was Dr. Norman Waldrop. Norman Waldrop is the foot and ankle guy in Alabama. Those two had a relationship before he ever had this injury. So immediately that's going to be his go-to guy that he trusts for this injury. And also, Dr. Waldrop is one of the most sought after foot and ankle specialist. He's been a consultant because he's the Alabama foot and ankle guy.
Yeah.
Obviously, they have injuries. But he's also now a team physician for the New Orleans Saints. And there are plenty of pro athletes in multiple sports who go to him. So the reason that matters is because when I see somebody's having a surgery that, Lisfranc injuries there's a spectrum, but they can be very significant.
Yeah.
It matters that it's not like your third time doing it.
Okay.
You want to have a guy who's well-trained, who's done a lot of procedures, who is familiar with what the demands of an athlete are. So you take somebody who's been the head team foot and ankle guy for Alabama, like you talk about demands, that's probably one of the most demanding, programs in the country in terms of return to sport, timelines, and all of that. The Titans have been really good at managing some of their players who've been dealing with injuries. You saw how they managed A.J. Brown across the season, where afterwards we heard that maybe he wasn't going to be able to play the rest of that season. So they've done a good job. Even when Delaney Walker was playing there, they really managed him well when he was dealing with injury. So the combination of the two, to me, I was like, he has a chance to come back. And we actually got into a big debate on our podcast because the guys did not believe it with the nature of the injury and what they were hearing. And I knew a lot of people were speculating they couldn't, but I thought if there's no problems, he will be back by the playoffs. And he was.
I would be remiss, and I should kick to Josh now, but I really don't care. I would be remiss if I didn't ask about another player in a similar situation. It's not a team we were going to talk about, and I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, but what is your overall takeaway of Cam Akers? Because it's a very similar situation, but in my opinion, a much more serious injury, but maybe I'm wrong, and I'm sure you'll tell me if I am. But I'm very worried about Cam Akers. I'm actually writing an article about being worried about Cam Akers right now. And I don't know, especially what we saw when he came back. So if you could just give us kind of a similar takeaway of what you did with Derrick Henry on Cam Akers, I think that would be great.
Well, I think it was amazing what he did to come back when he did. And I think both for him and for his team and just, the hard work that he did to come back from an Achilles tear, which is not an insignificant injury, but it's also not a career ender anymore like it used to be. I think that surgeries have advanced and understanding the rehab has advanced to the point where you can't necessarily his timeline was interesting. You can't necessarily force the timeline depending on the player and depending on the nature of the injury. By that, I mean, not all Achilles injuries are the same either. Sometimes they tear in the middle of the tendon. Sometimes they tear up very high near where the calf is. And sometimes they tear right where the tendon attaches to the bone. And so what they have to do in the repair and how delicate it is can often dictate how quickly they can drive the rehab. Okay. So that is part of it. And what he had done, and the Dr. Elatrash, who operated on him, did like a reinforcement with this suture tape, which basically it's almost like a check rein on that tendon. So there's a comfort there that when you reach a certain point in the biological healing, that will allow you to push a little harder and still be safe. And that's what they did. They have an awesome rehab staff with the Rams, one of the best in the league. And so I felt like everything was lined up for him to have the chance to be able to come back. But that doesn't mean that you're performing at your tip-top level by then either. So from a healing standpoint, I think he showed us that he has. I'm not particularly worried about that. The unknown is, can we get the same player back eventually? I still think there's a decent chance of that. I didn't expect that when he came back.
Okay. I love that you used the term eventually, because that's kind of what my take on the article was going to be, is that 2022, I don't think is the year. I think it's one more year out, but enough about that. Josh, I've cut you off a couple of times here, but having now heard Stephania,
Josh is just hanging out.
And that's where he wants to be.
Sorry.
But Josh, are you comfortable taking Derrick Henry as a first-round pick this year after hearing what you've just heard from Stephania? Obviously, what he did last year, and if you haven't paid attention to fantasy football lately, Derrick Henry was the RB21 in 8 games last year, which is obscene. He was still an RB1, a top 12 running back, I think 5 games after his injury. Like, he missed 5 games and was still that good. So Josh, let's say, the big wide receivers have went, you're somewhere around 7, 8, 9 in the first round. Are you comfortable pulling the trigger on Derrick Henry in fantasy drafts?
I mean, I'm comfortable but I don't think I will. And it's not because I don't think that, Derrick Henry's going to, falter by any means. One thing that we saw last year previous to the injury, a lot of his metrics came down big time. And a lot of that was just the Titans offensive line not being as good. That offense as a whole wasn't very good. He was the offense, and he literally had to carry them. And, just going from 303 carries, 378 carries, he averaged almost 28 rush attempts per game in those 8 games last year. Like, I understand he didn't have a lot of wear and tear in the early part of his career, but that type of heavy usage in such a small period of time can weigh on a guy. And I understand that he's built different. I'm with you 100% on that one, Stephania. But if he's not scoring 15 touchdowns, 16, 17, 18 touchdowns, the lack of receiving usage makes him a very questionable early RB in my opinion. Like, I would much rather have like a Najee and Austin Eckler, like those guys that I know are going to get a ton of receptions.
I say maybe not a ton, but we saw that passing usage change in those 8 games last year too. He was on pace for 40
did, yeah.
targets.
They definitely used them more. I mean, I have him projected for 40 targets, which, I mean, that alone would be a career high, and that's him playing the majority of the season. So, I mean, he's still, I still have him as a top 6, top 7 running back. But again, it's just he's definitely a safe play. I'll say that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with taking a safe play in the first round because you know what you're going to get.
Yeah. I will say this. I was looking at something I was doing for work yesterday, looking at because I was doing something on running back depth and why you should have it. And only 8 running backs last year in 2021, only 8 running backs had 70% or more of the touch percentage among the running backs on their team for the games they played. And Derrick Henry was at the top of the list.
Yeah, playing half the games.
Like, just volume wise and the way they run their offense, he is, that's the opportunity part. He's the guy who's going to touch the ball the most, and then
maybe more so this year with the way that offense.
I was going to say, there's nobody on this team.
Right, that's
nobody on this team.
So with this very strange offense, with the major changes at the weapons and the return of Derrick Henry, is there a Tennessee Titan you're avoiding in fantasy? Stefania?
Me, Ryan Tannehill. I think he's gotten away with some. I guess a thumbs up.
Oh, 2 thumbs up.
I mean, perception-wise, I think it was like, hey, Ryan Tannehill's better in fantasy than you thought. But last year there was a drop. I think I looked it up. He was finished quarterback 7 2 years ago and quarterback 12 last year. Everything went down. His red zone TD percentage went down from 38% to 24%. He had 14 picks and 10 fumbles. Mm-hmm. Yikes.
No bueno.
Yeah, and the thing is,
Tannehill right there.
Well, they had problems with their offense. They were struggling with their receiver issues, but I think there's still going to be some of that. I love Robert Woods there. I think Robert Woods, it's a great landing spot for him. I really like him as a player. I think he could become a new favorite, for Ryan Tannehill. I think he helps him out. I mean, one of the things about Robert Woods is he's a receiver who will make his quarterback better. We saw that in LA, so I think he's lucky. Tannehill's lucky to have him, and that will help him out. But it's just quarterback depth is so strong that Tannehill's not on my list.
I'm not even going to beat that dead horse because this show is a pretty anti-Ryan Tannehill show anyway. But you mentioned Robert Woods. I'm going to skip Josh's last question. I just want to throw out 2 more names because it's what you do. Robert Woods injury, Traylon Burks conditioning. I don't even know what to call it right now in the preseason. What are your thoughts on the 2 of them? It sounds like you're pretty confident with Robert Woods.
Yeah, I think because number one, I just mentioned the LA Rams medical staff is outstanding. So where he had his surgery.
So he leaves one and comes to the second team. That was
right. Where he did his rehab was really one of the best places that he could. And on top of that, just who he is, a lot of it, the athlete, who they are they doing the work? Everything about him said that he was. The timing of his injury gives him enough time to be in a pretty good spot. I think they're bringing him back in a sensible way. These guys typically the metrics are not the same out of the gate. Every so often they are. Every so often you get a Cooper Kupp who had a great season coming back from ACL injury, but guess what? Also a Ram. So I think
sensing a pattern here.
right. But and then he's in new offense, and I don't know if we're going to blame everything on Robert Woods, depending on how this unfolds. But I think he's got a chance to be solid, and even though I think he'll be better as the season goes on, because they always get more confidence in their knee as the season goes on. Traylon Burks, I think it's really interesting. We've heard about asthma and conditioning issues, and I'm not really sure, being remote from it, what that means or what it looks like. But, it's hot everywhere right now. It'll be really interesting to see what happens in camp and how there's so many better ways of monitoring athletes now than there used to be when it comes to some of these things, all these GPS, these wearables, these things that measure like their workload and how much they're, if they're struggling, that I think they're going to be better informed with him than they might've been 10, 15 years ago. But he's definitely somebody I'm watching during camp to see how he's doing.
Well, there you go. And you hit one very good point on Robert Woods that I wanted to reiterate, is you think he may get better as the season goes along. If you draft Robert Woods, have patience. Don't let him go after 2 or 3 weeks if it's rough, especially in a new offense. So I think that's a really good pointer just for fantasy drafts in general, that sometimes it takes patience. And we always say it takes patience with rookie wide receivers as well. Josh, do you have anything you want to add to the Titans?
No.
All right.
She hit everything that we wanted to talk about. I mean, it's the same reasons why, I think that Burks has upside and you think Woods has upside.
Exactly. Joe's biggest sleeper is Nick Westbrook-Akine. Basically, it's because he's the freest of free in fantasy drafts. Wide receiver ADP of 130. That's at wide receiver. And he thinks he'll play outside Traylon Burks, opposite Traylon Burks with Woods in the slot. His IDP stash is Jeffrey Simmons. Basically, he said he's the only solid option on this defense. Everyone else on the Tennessee defense is very situational. We are going to finish up with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 13-4 last year. New head coach, Todd Bowles, who moves up. Same offensive coordinator, Byron Leftwich, who stuck with the team. So you can expect a very similar Tampa Bay Buccaneers team. Player with the most fantasy upside. Josh has Rashad White. I have Cameron Brate. And then we both call Godwin a trap play. And we will certainly be talking about Godwin with Stephania. But I am going to start with Stephania, who is the Tampa Bay Buccaneer. And this is a much more interesting question. Who is the Tampa Bay Buccaneer you want to leave your fantasy draft with?
So Chris Godwin's my favorite receiver on the team.
Okay.
But this year I would say it's Mike Evans, just because, it's clearly a trust pattern between him and Tom Brady.
Yeah.
And that the first year I think was a little harder to see, but I think last year that relationship on the field was really good, really sound. And I think he'll be who he relies on, especially early. So, Mike Evans for me is probably the one I'd be looking to go with.
Josh, what are your thoughts on Evans?
I love Evans. I know one of our contributors, Steve Lawson, has kind of been down on Mike Evans and thinks that Godwin is kind of the better option. But I mean, you look at these last 2 years with Tom Brady, Mike Evans has more targets per game, receptions per game, receiving yards per game, and touchdowns per game over Chris Godwin. Like, this is the guy that Tom Brady wants. And now you're going into a season with Chris Godwin, having a late season knee injury, now coming back and Stephania, please correct me if I'm wrong, but typically, players that have these ACL type injuries, they're not fully 100% typically until year 2. There's a ramp up period here. And, it affects every player differently. And some players jump back a little bit sooner than others. We don't know how Godwin's going to bounce back, but we do know he just got his contract extension, and obviously the team loves him, and that's great. But who's the guy that Brady looks for? It's Mike Evans. So I'm all in on Evans. I have him as a top 7 wide receiver this year.
This is one of my it kind of goes to one of my points about knowing, sort of the background beyond just that it's an ACL. So he had ACL, MCL injury, and he's doing very well by all accounts. But your point about them signing him to a 3-year deal that's an investment that goes beyond a year. A lot of guys coming off injury, if there's any kind of negotiate, if they happen to be in a window where they're signing something, it's like a 1-year deal because they want to see how they're doing. you're telling me there's a 3-year deal. That tells me that you are making a bigger investment than just this fall. So you're not going to be incentivized to rush him back for the fall. The other thing, and very interesting in Tampa Bay, their strength and conditioning coach, woman, is also a physical therapist, their head strength and conditioning coach. She was promoted to a title that I don't recall off the top of my head, but it's like director of something performance. You know, they have some of these like merger titles that are kind of overseeing, the way they described it, everything that's under the umbrella of strength and conditioning and rehab. And when I see somebody who's a PT who's also strength and conditioning, like that's often one of the challenges in the clubs is strength and conditioning and rehab are sort of butting heads, you know, kind of different goals. Rehab is often slowing them down. Strength and conditioning is pushing them forward. And when you have somebody there who has that understanding, it makes me much more confident that the way they're going to move Godwin forward is going to be definitely in a controlled manner that's in his best interest. So I am not convinced that he plays week 1. I don't know that he needs to. I don't know that they're pressing for it. They would rather have him back healthy and not risk something that's going to compromise him, especially because, look, this team they don't think anymore about getting through the regular season. They're looking at the postseason. So 17 games was not their goal, 20, whatever it is, 20 or 21. That's the goal. And so looking at that, what do you care if you don't have him for the first month or the first 6 weeks, or you bring him back and you integrate him slowly? That means, to me, I love what the NFL team is doing, but for fantasy purposes, it's probably going to make me shy away from Godwin, at least at the point where I'd have to draft him.
I was going to say, is he your player to avoid then on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers?
Yeah, avoid it. No, Leonard Fournette is my player to avoid.
Okay, well, I wanted to, first and foremost, if I take nothing away from this show, if you've done this already and I've missed it, I apologize, but I would love a 32-team rank of conditioning and medical.
I won't do that.
I figured
I'll say
wouldn't.
little things here and there, but I do want to continue to work in the industry.
I kind of figured that might be an issue. The information you provided is top notch. I cannot thank you enough. I had no idea this is what we were getting with this, and this has been fantastic. But let's talk about Leonard Fournette, because when I saw the report of 270, I went and looked at his playing weight and saw 228, and oof.
I don't think Fournette's ever been 228. Let's be honest.
What he's listed. That's what he's listed.
Maybe middle school.
Okay. What he was listed as. But anyways,
I know.
please.
They always list him taller and lighter, or
yeah.
Well, here's the thing. He's had injury issues before, if you recall. Yes. I mean, he was sort of left for dead in Jacksonville. That it was not a good relationship. He had an ankle issue coming out of college that then was sort of problematic off and on for the first couple of years in Jacksonville, and he had hamstring injuries on top. It was not good. It's amazing what happens when you get a call to join Tom Brady and all of a sudden you're in a situation where you have, imagine going from the Jaguars and that setup to now you're in Tampa Bay and you're on a team that has a chance to be a contender. It's hard to say that any of us wouldn't all of a sudden elevate our game and do what we needed to do. But, now they've won a couple times. And
contract too.
Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe you get a little more complacent. Maybe the off season, you're like, I can get that back when the season starts. But you know what? The older you get and with the history behind you, the harder it is to just knock it out during training camp. And so I do have some concerns with him because I think that those injury things didn't totally go away. He has been in a really good situation there, but the combination of he's a little bit longer in the tooth now, and he's not in as great shape as he should be, and I don't want that experiment on my roster.
That's fantastic, because that's right now you have to make that debate pretty early on in drafts, second, third round. And that does feel very, very high. And people are passing up guys like proven commodity Ezekiel Elliott to take Leonard Fournette. And that just,
who I think is way undervalued. Like, I love Zeke, and he was hurt. Anybody who's had a PCL injury will tell you, like, it's not a surgical repair. It has to scar in. The only time a PCL is fixed really is if you have multi-ligament knee injury in the process. They're trying to tack down a few things, but surgery it's the location, it's what it does. It's just the idea is you let it rest and you let it kind of stiffen up and scar in. And when you're in the middle of a season, that doesn't happen. And a lot of guys can be functional. You wear a brace on it to help keep it from feeling like your knee is slipping around, but it's not ideal. You lose power. You lose all these things of people saying he lost a step. He's not as explosive. I'm like, yeah, he is a torn ligament, isn't he?
Yeah.
It's kind of hard. But I think that, he knows where he's at. This is obviously a huge year. He has worked out hard in the offseason. I just think he is undervalued. And the notion that Tony Pollard is going to just assume his role, that's not happening. I mean, his value is in offsetting and complementing Zeke. And there are things that he can do that are different from Zeke, but I see him, especially with Dak being that much better coming into this year because he's not coming off a major injury. I just think that connection, Zeke's going to look like an earlier version of Zeke, I believe. Maybe I'll be wrong.
True definition of a change of pace back.
Yeah.
That's what
we talked about it last week, Josh, and I think you were the one who hit on it, that these change of pace backs are more efficient because they're seeing fewer carries. So you can't just take his 5.3 yards a carry and translate that over 300 carries for Tony Pollard. That's not how it works. So
exactly.
I want to be very respectful of Stephania's time because I know we're kind of in a crunch here. We have the injury relevance. Is there any other Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Stephania, that you didn't get a chance to talk about that you want to say something about?
No.
Josh, how about you?
I just want to say her trepidation with Leonard Fournette makes me feel a little bit better about my upside pick of Rachaad White.
There you go.
But I keep going back to our Stars of Tomorrow series when we had Katie Flower on during our running back show.
Yeah.
And one of her scouting techniques and tricks is identifying running backs with a, quote, steak ass. And Rachaad White did not fit the bill for that. So I'm very torn on whether or not Rachaad White can be, a good running back in the NFL versus taking advantage of an opportunity that is staring him right in the face. So I'm like, it's the devil and the angel on the shoulder here. And which way do I lean?
I like it. Rachaad White is Joe's sleeper, and he basically says maybe he won't drop passes or fumble or be 700 pounds. So I think Joe is just taking shots at current and former Tampa Bay Buccaneers running back. His IDP stash is Akeem Hicks. He is 32 now, but playing with Vita Vea, Shaq Barrett, Levante David, Devin White. Basically, he's going to be one of the most – exactly. And so that's going to free up some space for Akeem Hicks. And Joe calls him one of the most underrated defensive tackles. So I think it's going to be a very, very good play for Akeem Hicks. And that's it, folks. We want to make sure, like I said, we are respectful of Stephania's time. Stephania, everybody knows who you are. Everybody knows where to find you. Do you have any projects you're working on or anything you want to plug?
Well, I think just, the 06010 is back. It's happening. I don't want anyone to think we've gone away. We're just sort of in that little lull of getting ready for our preseason stuff. So stay tuned. We will be going daily. I think it starts the first week of August. So just kind of keep your eyes and ears open. And once the podcast goes, it's, we still do the audio podcast. It's available on all, anywhere you get your podcast, but we also do video. It's Twitter Live. It's in the ESPN fantasy app. We have it. It will be YouTube as well. So the podcast is everywhere as far as I know. And,
as it should be.
When we get to the season, we'll be doing fantasy football now on Sundays, and there will be lots of other things. Also go over to if you go to the app, go to our draft kit. There's so much that's out now that's so good. Mike Clay does this playbook thing that is an incredible amount of work, and it's just come out. And I have a whole injury preview that is going to be up shortly. So,
yeah. And if you haven't picked up on this show, you want her injury preview because this has just been the best injury information I've ever gotten. Josh, take us out of here.
Yeah. Stephania, thank you. This has been a genuine pleasure, and I'm so happy we were able to make this work. And thank you for giving us the hour that you were able to give us. It's been invaluable information. And like I said at the beginning of the show, checking off an item off the bucket list. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you guys for having me. Appreciate it.
As everybody knows, following along with these shows, this is smack dab in the tail end of our Look Inside preview series. We've had a number of player spotlight articles that have hit the website. Last week, we had Josh Jacobs, Rondale Moore, CeeDee Lamb. Monday, we had Josh Allen. Today, we have Derrick Henry. Friday, we'll have Mike Evans popping up from Joel Worth on Friday. So, and also, if you missed on Monday, again, we do Mock It Like It's Hot with Ryan and our new co-host, Austin. We did a third-round reversal draft with Brandon Hay from IDP Guys. Ryan, who's the guest next week, and what draft are you doing?
So we're going to have Emerson Beery on the show. He is at Dynasty _analyst. And in my campaign to make Cole Kmet not be drafted in at least one of these drafts, I am going to require no tight ends in this mock draft. I am going to have a RB tight end flex spot and a wide receiver tight end flex spot. So I'm giving you the choice to not draft a tight end and to not draft Cole Kmet. So tune in. It'll be Monday at 11.
That should be interesting. Well, and next week's No Punt Intended will feature the Packers, Stefania's San Francisco 49ers, and the Kansas City Chiefs, with one of our favorite guests that we've ever had. He is one of the co-hosts of Ball Blast Football and the star of MB Fantasy Life social media, Mr. Jake Trowbridge. And unfortunately, Joe won't be here to kick him off for quote-unquote bad internet, which has kind of been a running joke on our show since he's been on with us. So the last thing I want to get to, because as many of you know that follow us, Stephania was one of our guests on last year's Women of Fantasy shows. Last week, we started kind of slowly revealing what our raffle giveaways would be this year. We announced what jerseys did I announce last week? The signed Larry Fitzgerald Cardinals jersey, a signed Emmitt Smith Cowboys jersey. Yep. Kind of continuing on with the former stars of yesteryear. We'll be raffling off a signed Deion Sanders Falcons jersey.
Oh, nice.
So then I want to kind of go back to the present day stars, and this guy came into the league and absolutely set it on fire. So we're going to give away a signed Najee Harris Steelers jersey. And for the second year in a row, because I can, and because we talked about the Buffalo Bills today, a signed Josh Allen jersey.
Nice.
$5 buys you a raffle ticket. All of it will go into a scholarship fund, which will benefit Galvanize, our new partner going forward. Laura Oakman's organization. They're currently in Los Angeles with the Chargers. Great group of women out there, and we can't be more excited to help grow that community and helping women get more involved in sports and everything that they do. So feel free, tune in. We're going to announce the guests here in the next coming weeks. I promise you, it's going to be another great lineup. And yeah, that's really all I got. Ryan, you want to do the outro, or do you want me to close it?
All I know is that defense wins championships. Offense wins fantasy. Tune in next week with Jake Trowbridge. Everybody, have a wonderful day. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you, Stephania.